The red light on the microphone blinked, signaling it was time. I leaned into the mic, my voice smooth and practiced after years of doing this. Good evening, night owls. You're tuned into the Graveyard Shift On, where the night is endless and the music never dies. I'm your host, keeping you company through the long, dark hours. So sit back, relax, and let's ride this wave together. The phone lines were quiet as usual. It was a Thursday, the kind of night when only the insomniacs, the loners, and the lost souls called in. Most nights I could count on some drunk stumbling over his words or a bored trucker telling me about the miles left to go. The station was isolated, perched on the edge of the city, just beyond where the streetlights started to fade into darkness. Perfect for someone who didn't mind being alone. I queued up another song, something slow and melancholic, the kind of music that felt like it was made for the dead of night. My eyes drifted to the clock. 2:13 a.m., 3 more hours, and then I could head home, crawl into bed, and let the quiet of my own apartment swallow me whole. Then the phone rang. I glanced at the flashing lines, surprised. It was rare to get a call this early in the night. With a sigh, I picked up the receiver and hit the button to patch it through. Midnight frequencies, you're on the air. A woman's voice crackled through the line, shaky and breathless. Hello? Is anyone there? You've got me, I replied, keeping my tone light. What's on your mind tonight? Please, you have to help me, she whispered, her voice trembling. There's something in my house. I paused, glancing at the monitor to make sure we were still on the air. Ma'am, if you're in danger, you should call the police. No, they won't understand. It's not human. Her voice broke, and I could hear the unmistakable sound of sobbing. It's watching me. Please, it's watching me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This was new. Where are you right now? I'm hiding in the bathroom, she whispered, her voice barely audible now. But I don't think I can stay here. It's in the hallway. I can hear it breathing. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could say anything, there was a loud crash on the other end of the line, followed by a piercing scream. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. What the hell had that been? A prank? A disturbed caller? My hand hovered over the button to end the call, but something made me hesitate. I looked out the window of the booth. The station parking lot was empty, bathed in the dull orange glow of a single flickering streetlight. Beyond that was nothing but darkness, an inky blackness that swallowed everything it touched. A shiver crawled up my spine. The phone rang again. I jumped, my hand knocking over a stack of CDs. I swore under my breath, then snatched up the receiver. Midnight frequencies, I said, trying to keep the unease out of my voice. You're on the air. This time it was a man's voice. Low, rough, and urgent. You have to warn them. They're coming. I frowned. Who's coming? The creatures, he said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. They're not human. They can't be human. They're everywhere. My neighbor. His voice broke off into a sob. My neighbor. She let them in. They're in her house now. I can hear them through the walls. I felt a cold knot form in the pit of my stomach. Where are you? I locked myself in my basement, he whispered. But they know I'm here. They always know. You can't hide from them forever. Before I could ask him anything else, the line went dead again. I stared at the phone, my pulse pounding in my ears. Something was very wrong. These calls, they weren't normal. They weren't the usual late-night ramblings of lonely listeners. I glanced at the window again. For a moment, I thought I saw something. A shape, just beyond the light, lurking in the shadows. But when I blinked, it was gone. I shook my head. I was letting this get to me. It was just a few weird calls, nothing more. But even as I told myself that, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The phone rang again. My hand hovered over the receiver, hesitation prickling my skin. I didn't want to answer it. Not this time, but I had to. I was the voice on the other end. I was supposed to be there for the night owls, the insomniacs, the lost souls. I picked up the receiver. Midnight frequencies, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You're on the air. There was no sound on the other end, just silence. And then, faintly, so faintly I almost didn't hear it, a whisper. They're here. The line went dead. I dropped the receiver, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I looked out the window again, and this time I saw it, just beyond the reach of the light. A shape, tall and thin, with eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness, watching me. The phone rang again, but I didn't pick it up. All I could do was stare at the creature outside, praying that it wouldn't come any closer. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time. I pushed the door open and stepped into the hallway. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, casting harsh shadows against the walls. The station was eerily quiet. Usually, I found comfort in the solitude, but now every creak and groan of the old building sent a jolt of fear through me. I needed to get out of here. But as I made my way toward the exit, something caught my eye. Down the hallway, just beyond the reach of the light, a door was ajar. The storage room. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. I had walked past that door on my way in tonight. I was sure it had been closed. Slowly, I stepped toward it, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The closer I got, the more I could hear it. A faint scratching sound, like nails scraping against wood. I stopped just short of the door, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But I couldn't. I had to know. I reached out and pushed the door open, the hinges creaking in protest. The room was dark, the only light coming from the hallway behind me. The scratching noise stopped abruptly, leaving a suffocating silence in its place. I stepped inside, squinting into the darkness. Boxes were stacked haphazardly around the room, casting long, ominous shadows. And then I saw it. At first it was just a glimpse, a flash of movement in the corner of my eye. I turned, but whatever it was had vanished into the darkness. My heart was racing now, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I reached for the light switch, fumbling in the dark until my fingers found it. The light flickered on, casting a harsh yellow glow over the room. I scanned the space, searching for any sign of movement, but everything was still, too still. I stepped further into the room, my eyes darting between the boxes and shadows, and then I saw it again. A dark figure crouched behind a stack of crates. Its limbs were unnaturally long, its skin stretched tight over its bones. It didn't move, it just watched me, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. I froze, every muscle in my body tensed. My mind screamed at me to run, to get out of there, but my legs wouldn't move. The creature's gaze held me in place, its eyes filled with a cold, predatory intelligence. And then, slowly, it began to move. Its limbs unfolded with a grotesque crackling sound, bones shifting beneath its pale skin. It was tall, impossibly tall, and as it straightened it let out a low, guttural growl that echoed through the room. My breath caught in my throat as it took a step toward me, its movements unnervingly smooth and deliberate. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the wall. My hand fumbled for the door, but I couldn't find the handle. The creature took another step, its eyes never leaving mine. I could feel its gaze boring into me, cold and unfeeling. Finally, my fingers found the door handle. I yanked it open and bolted into the hallway, slamming the door shut behind me. My heart was pounding in my ears, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could still hear the creature on the other side of the door, its nails scratching against the wood again, this time more urgently. I didn't wait to see if it would break through. I turned and ran down the hallway, my footsteps echoing off the walls. The exit was just ahead. If I could make it outside, maybe I could get to my car. Maybe I could... The phone rang. I skidded to a stop, my eyes darting to the booth. The phone was ringing again, louder this time, more insistent. I stared at it, my mind racing. I should ignore it, I knew that. But something pulled me toward it, something I couldn't explain. Slowly, I walked back to the booth, the phone's ringing growing louder with each step. My hand shook as I reached for the receiver. I hesitated for a moment, then picked it up. "Midnight frequencies," I said, my voice trembling. "You're on the air." There was a long pause on the other end and then a voice, soft, whispering, familiar. "It's inside now." I dropped the phone, my blood turning to ice. The door to the storage room creaked open behind me. And then I heard it. A low growl, the sound of something large and hungry moving closer. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. All I could do was wait. The growling behind me grew louder, vibrating through the floor of the station. I stood frozen, the phone receiver dangling from my hand, the sound of the dial tone faint in the background. Every instinct told me to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I could feel it, the thing from the storage room. Its presence heavy, its breath hot on the back of my neck. Slowly, I forced myself to turn around. The creature stood in the doorway, its massive frame hunched over, its glowing eyes locked on me. In the dim light of the hallway, I could see it clearly now. Its skin was a sickly gray, stretched tight over sharp bones, and its mouth was a gaping maw filled with jagged teeth. It moved with a fluid, predatory grace, its long limbs scraping against the walls as it crept closer. My back hit the desk, and I had nowhere else to go. I could feel the cold sweat on my skin, my heart hammering in my chest. The creature let out a low, rumbling growl, and then it lunged. I threw myself to the side, crashing to the floor as the creature slammed into the desk, sending papers and equipment flying. I scrambled to my feet, my hands fumbling for something, anything that could be used as a weapon. My fingers closed around a heavy metal microphone stand, and I swung it with all the strength I had left. The stand connected with the creature's head, and it let out a deafening roar of pain. I took the opportunity to sprint toward the exit, not daring to look back. My only thought was to get out, to escape whatever nightmare I had stumbled into. I reached the front door and yanked it open, the cold night air hitting my face like a slap. I could see my car parked just a few feet away, its dark shape a beacon of safety in the empty lot. I ran toward it, my breath coming in desperate gasps, my heart pounding in my ears. But just as I reached the car, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The phone in the station was ringing again. I stopped, the sound echoing through the quiet night. It didn't make sense. Who could be calling now? How could they even know? My hand hovered over the car door handle, but something inside me twisted, pulling me back toward the station. I turned and looked over my shoulder. The creature was nowhere to be seen, but the phone kept ringing, a shrill, insistent sound that drilled into my skull. I didn't want to go back, I knew I shouldn't, but I had to. Slowly, I made my way back to the station, the phone's ringing growing louder with each step. I reached the doorway and peered inside. The booth was trashed, papers strewn everywhere, equipment knocked over. But the creature was gone. The phone, still hanging off the hook, rang again. I walked toward it, my hands shaking. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to stop, to turn around, to run. But I couldn't. I needed to know. I reached for the receiver, hesitated, then lifted it to my ear. "Hello?" My voice was barely a whisper. The line crackled with static, and then a voice, my own voice, spoke back to me. "You never left." A cold wave of terror washed over me. I spun around, but the station was empty. The windows were dark, no sign of the creature. And yet, something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The air felt heavy, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in. And then I saw it, my reflection in the glass of the booth. It stared back at me, but something was off. Its eyes, my eyes, were empty, hollow, filled with something dark and inhuman. And slowly, a twisted smile spread across its face. I staggered back, dropping the phone. My reflection didn't move. It just stood there, grinning at me with that unnatural, twisted expression. I turned to run, but the door wouldn't open. No matter how hard I pulled, it stayed shut, trapping me inside. The air around me grew colder, and I could hear it now, the low, guttural growl of the creature. But this time it wasn't coming from behind me. It was coming from inside me. I looked down at my hands, and my skin began to change, turning gray and rough, just like the creature's. Pain shot through my body as my bones twisted and elongated, my fingers growing into long, sharp claws. I tried to scream, but the sound that came out was a deep, monstrous roar. My reflection in the glass watched, its twisted grin growing wider, its eyes glowing with a sickly yellow light. It leaned forward, pressing its hand against the glass, mimicking my every movement. And then, as I stared into those hollow eyes, I realized the truth. I had never left the booth. I had never escaped. I had been trapped here all along, and the calls were from me. They were warnings, echoes of my own voice trying to tell me what I was becoming. But it was too late now. The transformation was complete. I could feel the hunger rising inside me, a primal, uncontrollable need. I turned toward the window, and for the first time, I saw the world through the creature's eyes, dark, distorted, filled with nothing but the desire to hunt. I let out one final bone-chilling roar as I tore through the door, disappearing into the night, leaving behind nothing but an empty radio booth and the echoes of a broadcast that would never end. The phone rang once more, but there was no one left to answer. The last broadcast had begun.